Well, hey folks, Jason here from God Conversations, and we're doing this series on helping church planters. And Terry is one of our elders over here at our church here in Medicine Hat, Alberta, Canada. And you lead worship here, do you?
Yeah. I guess formally, I guess I'd be called the worship ministries coordinator.
Okay.
So I oversee just our various worship teams, and then again lead the team myself. So.
Cool. Now, as an elder, you're not paid staff here, but you run your own business.
Yeah, I'd be considered a lay elder here. So my primarily my source of income is out in the workforce, working in the communications industry, and I find myself then here at a lay elder level, and specifically looking at the area of our corporate worship and most other things.
So your job, it takes you out of town sometimes.
Yeah. I find myself generally probably every second week, Monday to Thursday-ish, out of town, and back for the weekends, back for church Sunday mornings, and various other responsibilities that I have.
Well, that's great, because I just wanted our viewers to know that, you know what, you can be an elder in a church and still have a job and still run a business and still work out of town and still be influential.
Absolutely.
In the church. So, because you run or you facilitate the worship ministry, I want to talk about how to set up a worship service, and we'll go over a few questions here. How did you form your doctrine of biblical corporate worship?
Well, I'd say that's something that is built over time.
Yeah.
Which I think would be everyone's case in that regard. But a big part of it has been learning from others.
Okay.
And some training. I did some time at Bible college, and some of our training was in that regard towards worship in a broad sense, but specifically corporate worship.
Yeah.
And then just working alongside other elders, some of our paid vocational pastors.
Yeah.
Here, and then as we kind of developed some, belief in that as a church, or what we would say would be our philosophy for corporate ministry as a church here, as elders. So really working together and relying on, there's lots of resources, even free resources that you have access to. Folks like, the Gettys.
The Gettys, yeah.
Sovereign Grace Music, Matt Boswell, Matt Merker, Matt Papa, some of those guys. They have a lot of useful stuff online also.
Well, that's great. And so, like, you guys can download any of this stuff, and
Absolutely. Yeah. YouTube's got a lot of it. If you search, Matt Boswell, for instance, has some really good stuff out there on even specifics, like how do you choose, and I think we might talk about it a little later, but how do you choose one song from another? What makes a good song to sing?
And
those kinds of things.
We'll probably do that one. Yeah, we'll probably do that one in a couple questions here. Next question. How important is your personal time of worship in regards to leading corporate worship?
Well, I think it's tough to have the corporate sense. It's hard to separate the individual worship from the corporate worship.
Yeah.
And so one, in a sense, will drive the other. And I think it's important in understanding that sometimes we can get so fixated on our Sunday morning service of, whatever that is, that 2 to 3 hours of that's worship. Well, the reality is all of our lives are worship, and we need to build a good understanding of what worship actually is. And it's when we look at our lives and see what God has done in us, and He's created that change in us, our natural response then, as we come to love God, is to worship Him in all that we do. And you see that in Romans chapter 12, right? Paul shifts from the doctrine to say, okay, now offer yourselves to God as living sacrifices. This is your act of worship. So we want to understand that, and worship is a heart thing. It's not a physical thing. I mean, it's not something that we can look on the appearance and say, oh, that guy's worshiping. Well, he may look like it, just because my hands are up and my eyes are closed, or that doesn't necessarily. God knows the heart, and it's so whether it's in our own time in the Word, whether it's in our own time singing, whether it's in our own time praying and worshiping. it's about the heart just as much as it is when we gather together with brothers and sisters. For us, it's Sunday mornings to worship. So I think that's critically important to understand, and really, I think, so that personal worship precedes our corporate worship. And
that's great. Yeah, like with me, I am not musically inclined, but I know that as I spend more time in the Word and when I preach and when I teach, a lot of that comes out in that, and it's a lot easier for me to put a sermon or Bible study together when I've been spending a lot of time in the Word all week anyway.
Yeah, and that's a good point you make, because even when we get to our Sunday services, I think sometimes we compartmentalize things and we go, well, the singing is worship.
Yeah.
Okay, we're done worshiping, now the pastor's going to preach it and we're going to be taught. The reality is we're worshiping as we sit under the Word. We're worshiping as we pray. We're worshiping as we give of,
our finances,
our time of offering. It's all corporately together, and all as we gather around the Lord's table, as we did this morning for communion, and some of those kinds of things. It's really critical to understand everything that we're doing as we gather together is worship. And then I would say this, as someone who's leading worship, as anyone who's going to gather together, we sometimes can have, at least in our culture, I think here anyways, this idea of I'm coming to get filled, I'm coming to get encouraged, and the music is what brings me into worship. Well, the reality is we're coming to gather, and this is my belief, that we're gathering together to worship corporately, and we come prepared to do that. We might listen to music on the way and prepare, and Sunday mornings in our culture can be hectic.
Yes.
Getting everyone out the door, getting everyone to church. Sometimes the farthest thing from our mind is what we're going to do. And I just think, especially if you're leading, if you're going to be out leading, it's critically important to...
So I just want to recap something very important you said. When you come to lead worship, you spent so much time in personal worship that you're prepared to lead worship.
Yeah.
That's really good. Now let's another question. What do you look for when choosing songs or hymns to sing in church?
That's a really good question. And I think when we think on that, we kind of have to go back to understanding, what are we doing? Like, what are we here to do? And what should our worship be? Obviously, we said, if God's done that change in our heart, drawn us to Himself, our response is we want to sing. We want to grow in our knowledge of Him. And so as we do that, Christ becomes centric in our worship, not us. So there's two things. We can kind of look at the substance of the song. What is the song saying? And then secondly, just, is it something that works for people to sing as a group? So I'll start with the first then. When we look at a song, we look at its lyrics. And we say, does this song, we need to understand that singing teaches things. Our songs teach us, right? A lot of people build theology from the songs they sing, probably even sometimes more so than what they're reading even in Scripture, for right or wrong. So as we do that, we're looking at songs that are theocentric, or they are focused on God.
And not focused on what God does for me.
That's
but
right.
Focused on God.
Now, and yet you can say, I can sing of what God has done for me because He's great.
Yes.
Not because I need something and because I need to be filled or encouraged, but because He's great, and my personal experience is He's done this in my life, namely salvation. That the gospel has been brought to me, and I come to an understanding of it. So I can sing about the truths of the gospel. I can sing about God and what He's done, and especially as it is applied to me. But sometimes that needs to be balanced a little bit, because sometimes we need to sing about who God is and focus on Him and not on ourselves. So I try to be careful when we're singing together. Something to keep in mind is it's still fine, I believe, at times to sing of I or me, but I really try to be thinking through of, let's sing of we. Let's our God, this great salvation that we have as a body. We lift up our voices and we sing, instead of I do.
I'm glad that you talked about that, because I did a video on what is the church, and we looked at koinonia, and it's almost a trinity in itself. where it is my personal fellowship with God, the corporate church's fellowship with God, and my fellowship with the corporate church and God.
Right.
And if we're just focusing on me and God in corporate worship, we're missing that koinonia.
And that goes back to what we said before, part of being our preparation time. And this isn't just for leaders, this is for anyone who might be attending a corporate worship together or service time together, is that me to God relationship. I'm working on, I'm doing that all week.
Mm-hmm.
The goal of our time together is that we do this together.
Yes, I think that's great. Last question for this video. Do you confer or meet with your pastor when designing a worship service?
Yes. I'm a fairly firm believer on that the worship leaders work really closely with the pastor, specifically whoever it might be. Obviously, as we're talking in the church planting scenario, it can be a little bit different week to week.
Mm-hmm.
You may not have that set guy all the time.
Yep.
I feel like it's very, very critically important that we work together as we build song lists, as we build even the order of how this week's service is going to go. What's he preaching on? Does he have a song that he feels would really augment, the word that he's bringing?
Mm-hmm.
That's on his heart that we might sing together.
Mm-hmm.
And if that's there, I want to do what I can to make that work.
Mm-hmm.
Provided it's within my abilities as a musician to play.
Yeah.
And yeah, so that's something that I feel like is a critically important relationship.
That's excellent.
I should go back because I didn't finish before, I guess.
Yep.
Now thinking about it, we talked about the substance of picking a song.
Yeah.
And I briefly alluded to, does it sing well? Does it work well in a
Yep.
corporate setting? There's just songs that they're harder for bigger groups to sing. And obviously understanding languages that can change. Some songs, just the melodies may be hard to pick up.
Okay.
And yeah, they can be difficult. We want songs that are obviously clear in what they say and sound in doctrine.
Yes.
But they're also something that people can learn.
Well,
And they are able to sing relatively easily. It doesn't do us any good if I'm standing up there singing this song and everyone's like, man, this is really hard to follow, really, really hard to learn. And then also, I want to be careful how often I'm introducing new songs, because we want people involved.
You said something really that really piqued my interest. One of the things you said was making sure that there's sound in doctrine. There's a lot of Christian songs out today that don't seem very doctrinally sound.
Yeah, I think there's some that I find there's classifications. If we say there's really good songs,
Yeah.
there's really bad songs.
Yeah.
There's really bad songs that we don't even have to go there. We don't have to look into them much. There's just some songs that don't say anything, or they're so vague that they could mean really good or really bad. They don't mean anything, and I tend to shy away from those as well and stick with the good songs, especially when we're talking in a church plant scenario.
Yeah.
And to be honest, like, I haven't led music in that scenario.
Yeah.
But I would say in a situation and in a context where we know we have lots of believers or many believers who are young in the faith, I want to sing songs that are very clear.
Very clear, very precise, and focuses on the characteristics and glory of God.
Absolutely.
Terry, thank you for your time.
Hey, glad to help. Hopefully it was a help to you as you're logging in and watching this video.
Oh boy, thanks, Terry.